This episode is brought to you by Elevate AI. Are you looking for ways to integrate speech-to-text functionality into your contact center application? Do you often need to convert a lot of audio into text? Well, Elevate AI provides 1,000 interactions of AI-driven transcription per day free of charge. You'll get access to models built over 20-plus years with billions of interactions, and great features like social security number and credit card redaction. With a few lines of code, developers can integrate Elevate AI's API into your app. Check out their GitHub repositories for examples and the SDK. It's free to sign up and no credit card is needed. Head over to elevateai.com/HanselMinutes to get started today. That's elevateai.com/HanselMinutes. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Danica Fine. She's a senior developer advocate at Confluent. How are you?
Yeah. Hi, I'm great. How are you? It's so good to finally be talking with you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be chatting with you. Have you always been a huge nerd about data?
I don't know if it was by choice. I think I kind of just fell into it.
So was it nerdism that came first and then data? Not data and then the being a nerd?
Maybe.
You see what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah.
It's like I'm a web developer, but like I was a developer-minded person, and then the web happened, and I was like, "Ooh, that's cool."
That sounds good.
And then I ran in that direction. So I'm always interested in seeing how people get interested in their space.
Yeah, I fell into it actually. I really did. So when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect, Scott. I really did. That didn't work out because it was too creative for me. When I got to the school I went to, it just didn't work out. So I was like, cool, had a panic at like 2 a.m. Like, what am I going to study? And so I was very practical, very reasonable. And I was like, I'm going to study logic. Yeah, logic. So, and so
Bit of a leap, but okay.
Is it elitism? Is it a flex?
No, a bit of a leap.
Oh, a leap. Okay. That sounds nicer. Yeah.
I think being an advocate, being an architect would be an elite thing. I'm always like, if you meet someone at a party and they're like, I'm an architect. I'm like, ooh, that's fancy.
They always
but if
say
they're
it like that. That's true.
They always have to say it like that. But if they said like, yes, I work with data meshes and data lakes in the cloud with Kafka.
Data. It sounds like magic. It does.
Right. But then you say Kafka and they think you're like, maybe you're an English major.
Well, that's the thing. So I did study Kafka in college. I ended up doing that. So logic, it's high level math to the point where it intersects with computer science principles, right? Because that's what computer science is. So then I came back down the other side and did computer science, and that was pretty cool. And so when it came time to look for a job, I wanted to go do a PhD in insects, different direction. Didn't happen, kind of happy, but anyway, coming back to the actual thing we're talking about, I ended up at Bloomberg, software engineer. And then after this, 4 months of training that they put you through to actually understand their systems, because it's very intense. They have a lot going on there. I ended up on the data warehousing and business intelligence team. I just happened to be there. They kind of just assign you a team. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. I don't know if it's the most glamorous role for someone right out of college to end up on a data warehousing team, but I learned a ton and I formed a lot of opinions because I feel like people in data warehousing or the consumers that were requesting reports from us, they don't really have the most respect for the data. And so you have to build up serious opinions to sort of get through your job, I feel.
I'm going to push back on the glamour statement though, because as soon as you said Bloomberg, I'm like, oh my goodness, like the amount of data they must be producing. And like literally you could not think of a bigger streaming analytics type of a place than the kinds of material that's coming into a Bloomberg terminal. Yeah,
no, I learned a ton. It was an incredible role to be in. It didn't seem as shiny as like, some of the other people that I joined the role with or joined the team with. They were working on like specifically like news data or like building the chat system that analysts use to actually communicate with each other for trades and stuff. Like that sounded really cool. And then here I am like, cool, let's build reports. Let's build data visualizations. Let's help people get the most out of their data. And that, it took me a little bit of time to settle into that, but then I started making the most of it. And I feel like I just really ramped up my learning and just started absorbing everything from, the practitioners that I were working with. They had been in the space for decades, right, collectively. And here I am new, just trying to figure out, okay, how many petabytes are we dealing with today? Like, what's going on here? And it was really cool. It was really awesome.
When I started out, it was in the early 90s on SQL Server, and it was like, select star from books. And it was all very discrete, very kind of entity relationship. And the idea of streaming data that has no discrete beginning or end, and the idea of eventing, and so it didn't really kind of exist. We would use tables in awkward and uncomfortable ways. So I'm worried that maybe my understanding of data is 20 or 30 years old, because it's very much ER diagram related, or maybe in the last few years, Mongo and kind of like object document related. But I hear data warehouse, I hear data mesh, I hear data fabric. What's with the whole data plus noun? Maybe you could go through the glossary and help me understand and update my knowledge.
Buzzwords for the most part. I love it. I can't wait. Every time there's a new data plus noun, I get excited. I'm like, I loved when they came up with like data lakehouse. That's cute. That sounds elite. That's elite to me. But yeah, it's like, so you brought up data mesh, and I really like that word. I also hate that word. So it's just really about reframing our approach to our data. And I feel like most of these terms kind of are. It's like, how are you actually viewing and dealing with your data and just, treating it long term. So in data mesh specifically, we're sort of looking at our data in two separate ways. There's the analytical plane, right? That's where we're doing like our data science-y stuff with maybe our data lakes. That's part of the analytical plane. We have our data warehouses in there as well for business intelligence, like I was doing, and like reporting and building out visualizations and things for people, sort of batch jobs maybe. And then we have the operational data plane, right? Which is pretty much everything else that you need to make your business work, right? If you're doing microservices, or if you're maybe streaming data or all of your APIs, that's probably going to be handled in the operational data plane. And so, like I said, in the analytical side, we have our data lakes, our data warehouses, and all those fun sort of data nouns. But then we take a step back with data mesh. And data mesh looks at the operational data plane and the analytical data plane and says, let's reframe this. Let's put these all together, stop separating them, and then push back and really embrace sort of domain-driven design, right? And that, to me, I don't know if to you this sounds like it, but I feel like that's just common sense, Scott.
Well, most good ideas are common sense once you look back, because hindsight is 20/20, right?
Absolutely.
So then if I can paraphrase a little bit back to you to make sure I'm understanding. So if I have a data lake, that just means I have a big pile of raw data and I haven't built any analytics or anything on top of that yet. It's just a reservoir, a data reservoir.
Exactly. It's a reservoir, a data reservoir. Is that larger than a lake?
Is that a thing? Did we just make up a new thing?
It's more recreational than a lake.
That is true. Okay. And then a data warehouse, that just sounds like a box with a lake inside, as far as I'm concerned. But that's all the business data. That's the kind of stuff that people use to make decisions, right? So then the data mesh, which is the one that we like and also don't like, you said, which is that it's more of a framework. It's not do you point at a database or at a system and say that Kafka instance is our data mesh, or is it more philosophical and organizational?
It depends. So it is really what it's meant to be. When Zhamak Dehghani came out with these principles, right, of data mesh, it really was just that. It is, here's a framework to operate within, right? Here are some principles, some best practices to just follow and adhere to, and it's going to make your life easier, right? And so the principles are really great. It's just, have it to be domain-oriented data, make your data decentralized, push back on the people who own and create the data to build out a data product that other organizations within your business and your system can tap into. Make it self-serve. Don't make it difficult for people to get the data they need, because that's, I think, one of the biggest hurdles for any organization. And then have some sort of governance built on top of that, right? Make sure that the data looks how it's supposed to look and that no one's getting access to it that they shouldn't get access to. But it's really just those principles, right? You're not pointing to something and being like, that's a data mesh, and I'm going to put a bow on it, and you too can download that data mesh. That's not what it is. But I feel like people talk about it as though it is that shiny new thing, as though it is something tangible. But it's not. It was never meant to be.
I have heard it said that data meshes are very kind of distributed, they're API driven, and I've heard it said that data fabrics tend to be more technology centric, more centralized. Also, is that a fair? I mean, are they the opposites of something, a data mesh and a data fabric, or is that a misunderstanding on my part?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because data meshes are really popular right now. Like that's the emerging popular approach to data management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I could actually answer that. I haven't really looked too much into the fabric aspect of it.
Oh, that's cool.
But I do find it interesting. So yeah, it is just for how are we managing and bringing all of your data together, really.
Right.
Bringing it together while allowing it to be decentralized, right?
Right. And you mentioned the principles, the data mesh principles. Mm-hmm. So data as a product really is interesting to me because you said that it's about kind of democratizing and making the data available to anyone. Because back in the day, in my select star from books days, if I wanted to get like a report or ask a question, I would have to write an email, and then a week later, some analyst would do it. But now with all these tools that sit on top of these meshes, these API-driven systems, I, the business user, I'm putting my business user hat on, can ask questions, and I don't have anyone standing between me and the data. Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Ideally, that's how it should be, and I want it to be that way. The reality is, I think data mesh is, and just those sorts of best practices are getting us toward that. But in reality, I feel like just making the data available to whoever needs it and whoever could tap into it is just the first step, right? Then we also need that literacy aspect of it, right? Just because you have the data and you can select star from that table doesn't mean you know how to do anything with it. Doesn't mean that you know how to make use of it and turn it into real insights. So I think that a data mesh, while making this data a product and democratizing it to everyone, also needs to be done hand in hand to make people aware of what this data is and how to actually use it properly. My favorite thing was when I was building reports, because I was that person receiving those emails, right? Do XYZ with this data. And I'm like, have you seen your table lately? It looks bad. You haven't updated this in forever. So how am I going to give that data to you? But the number of times that people ask me for like a pie chart, I'm like, there's a million other ways that we could represent that data and it would be so much nicer. And you will answer 20 questions instead of one. And they're just like, wow, what? That exists. And so I think that that's just another really interesting hurdle that needs to be considered hand in hand because, knowledge is a big responsibility, Scott. And data is too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see in the future the way AI sits on top of all of these things. Because if the goal of a data mesh is self-serve data infrastructure, kind of as a platform, that means I should be able to ask questions in kind of clear businessy language. And then if a pie chart's wrong, it'll recommend better ways to visualize it. So I'm going to be able to build entire dashboards to answer questions and do it in a way without having to understand, visualizations or whether, the three charts that they taught us in school. Turns out that there's a lot more options than that.
Yeah. There are a ton more, and you have to also, again, know how to use them to get the most out of it. So it doesn't just stop at just being aware, right? You have to really almost be an expert. And I think that's where a lot of these, like, I feel like in the last 10 years or so, we've had more and more data-oriented roles emerging at companies, right? And it's those people who are the experts that understand how to actually unlock true value from data. And I don't know that they need to be the only people touching this data, right? But I think that the biggest deal is sort of, again, that literacy aspect of it, like having true data experts available at any sort of organization to sort of guide that literacy process as well.
Right. And then juxtaposing the more data, more open, more self-serve, more available, we have increasing concerns around governance, around privacy, around accidentally leaking, personally identifiable information. And those things are kind of diametrically opposed. Like, give them access to everything that they should have access to without leaking anything important and making sure that you're appropriate with all European laws, et cetera, et cetera. But I still want to ask those questions. That's a real challenge, data governance.
Yeah, no, that makes it tough. And that's a big part of data mesh, right? It's the fourth principle, but it's in there, right? How do we govern this and make sure that, you're still keeping things safe? So an interesting thing I think about data mesh is that I think that was the most difficult part, right? Is making sure that people have the right access at the right time. But when you look at it in conjunction with all of the principles, it sounds like a big ask, I feel, what data mesh is, right? You need to push back on teams to create and manage their data, to offer an actual product that is consumable and usable, and making it self-service. It's not just you can flip a switch and make this overnight. So I feel like a lot of folks look at this and they want to just scrap everything they have in their architecture and just start over and sort of re-implement this beautiful mesh and put it on a pedestal and have all of their problems solved overnight, including that sort of governance aspect. And I feel like that's not the reality of it. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It shouldn't be that complicated. I'm a Kafka person. I don't know if you knew, right? And I don't know if you could tell. But I think Kafka is an interesting technology to sort of bring in conjunction with a data mesh. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up. Event streaming really goes hand in hand with the idea of data products, right? Especially from Kafka, we've got topics, right? Those are where the data is stored. These topics are immutable, right? You don't have to worry about someone getting in there and ruining something that they shouldn't be ruining. They're usually pretty scalable. We've got nice APIs on top of it for actually getting data out and making it accessible from, the consumer API. And, Kafka does all that for you. And then on top of that, and this is where we get back to the governance aspect of it, is that there's the idea of this schema registry and making sure that your data looks how it's supposed to look, really pushes back for, standards and ensuring that people are getting the best data that they should be getting. And then from the Confluent sort of side of things, we have a lot of governance built on top of that too. So I think it's nice that you can get closer to that sort of pristine data meshy sort of thing, just with Kafka sort of out of the box as well, which is kind of nice. But yeah, governance is a really difficult thing. And you do have to ensure, if you're not using Kafka, if you're doing it in some other way, just to, you have to build another layer on top of it, right? To make sure that it's not getting out where it shouldn't be getting.
But if I have a company that is 20, 30 years old, it's grown over the years, and it's got old databases and new databases and pretty databases and goofy looking ones, can Kafka still be the foundation for my data mesh?
Absolutely. I do think so. Yeah. And so that's a nice thing. So if you kind of look at something every time I think about data mesh, I think of the ports and adapters, this sort of hexagonal architecture style, right? And that doesn't push back and make you move your data anywhere that it isn't already, right? It integrates with data sources and syncs where it is and just provides some sort of, ports and adapters, right? To make use of that information in a wider architecture. And I think sort of Kafka can fit into that as well, right? If you're just making your data available as a data product in topics, Kafka can integrate with any of your legacy databases, your data sources, any of the syncs where it needs to be later on. We were using Kafka at a pretty insane scale at Bloomberg as well, right? We weren't using it necessarily for the data warehousing team, but elsewhere, right? And we were able to integrate with all of these legacy things, not touch the stuff that has been working for 30 years because there's a very particular way about it and it should be left alone, right? But to modernize it, to bring that data into sort of streaming and build a product around that, we were able to do that with sort of the integrations with Kafka Connect and just using sort of the APIs that exist already with Kafka. So yeah, it doesn't have to be difficult.
Okay, good. So then for folks that are listening and learning about Kafka, or maybe they've heard it multiple times, but they don't quite get it in their heads, right? It interacts with databases. It can help be the heart of your data mesh. It's not a replacement for those databases because it's different. Its data storage is different than how databases function. And you're consuming the data off of Kafka using these tail reads, and the data has no end, right? It's just always, there's always going to be more data.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's, so Kafka, just to concisely put a bow on it, distributed event streaming platform, right? So it's not really meant to serve as a data store, like you said. So there is a special place for databases and, the traditional stores that you're already using. That's not to say that Kafka could not be. Is it a database? It can be. It could be. Should it be? That's another question. But But that's the cool thing, is that's what makes it good at being a sort of product, is that you can integrate with these data sources, bring the data into Kafka as that never-ending event stream, and leave it there for as long as you want, right? So that other folks can tap into that stream as new events are being created, as new data is being added.
Okay, so then the data mesh, the intent of the data mesh is to have these kind of like nodes in the mesh, and those can present databases, their apps, their APIs, their little data products, and presumably they're high quality, they're curated for the consumer, and then each individual team can basically feed their consumer, where I, as a consumer, am a business person. And are they running that through pipelines or streams to provide a projection of the data the way that I, the consumer, wants to see it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's flexible, right? Once you as a team, so say we are building, it's the e-commerce company. I feel like that's the easiest example for anyone to sort of understand, right? So we have different sort of silos, different teams managing different sets of data, right? We have the people actually building out the system that interacts with the website to collect orders, right? We've maybe got like a team managing the whole warehousing and inventory side of things and keeping track of that. We've got a whole advertising team managing that, and maybe someone managing the actual user data, because that has to be, behind some special vault to make sure that nothing gets out where it shouldn't be. So those are all the different, sort of nodes, the different domains of that business, right? And so when, say, orders come in, that's the first point where we are generating data, right? And along with your order, maybe you as a user are submitting, your address, you're inputting your payment details, you are saying how many new pairs of socks you want to buy, right, from this company. And so when that data first is being brought in so that team that manages the incoming orders, right, what would they be doing? Well, all right, maybe if we are leveraging Kafka here, what they'd probably do is they'd have a topic of orders, right? Just whatever data comes in on that web form, great. We are going to put that in a topic and have that available. But that's not a very good data product on its own, right? Because it's only really useful to maybe the orders team, right? Because they can see that holistic order, and that's useful to them. The data products that might be useful downstream are, well, okay, what inventory are we actually capturing and reducing from our inventory as part of this order, right? What items are being ordered? What user what has this user added to their carts maybe? And that might be going downstream to the advertising team, right? Or the orders, we're updating your address, maybe. That would be useful for the team managing the user data. So there's a lot of different data products that can be extracted from that singular incoming order, right? And so that team has the power to do that polishing, to have that being output and then consumed from other teams that they can integrate with their data products and update and improve their data products and produce something again that would go further downstream. So some of that might just be dumb pipelining, right? We're just taking the data as is, separating it out and putting it on a topic and making it available elsewhere. And some of that might be transforming or aggregating whatever might be more useful for a downstream team. Right. So it really does depend, but it's flexible.
Interesting. So it feels like a database like holds the state of things. I have one of something, I have 100 of something, and Kafka stores the things that happened in order to get to that state. It stores all of the events that occurred on the way. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of a bit of a brain teaser there for me.
There's a bit of a duality there. Like we like to say that you have that state, that sort of the actual, state of that inventory. And then we have what is actually happening to affect that state at any given time. Right. And if we, for some reason, the benefit of that is that if for some reason, this is a whole nother conversation. If we lost that inventory database for some, I don't know why, natural disaster, who knows, we could actually build that back up by the orders that we have coming in, that we have in Kafka, because you have sort of incremental state at any given time, and you can sort of replay what you actually had in that legitimate state, which is pretty cool. So
this might be dumb or it might be obvious, but I just kind of like had this moment where I went like, Kafka's like, I was going to say it's like Git for databases, because when Git came out, like everyone was like trying to get their head around logs and replaying events on top of existing things. And Kafka is this, yes, it can do long-term data storage, but that's not the point, right? It's just this infinite stream with no end and no beginning. Mm-hmm. But the idea that you can restore to a point by replaying events on top of it felt very kind of like source control for data, even though I know that's not what it is.
Yeah, well, it's, if that works for you, it works. I have absolutely no problem with that. Yeah, because Kafka is a log. It's just built on logs, right?
Yeah, but I used to think of the term of an audit log because I worked in banking for a very, very long time. And like there's your balance, which is state, but then there's your balance that can be calculated, right? Like you could keep track of a database record that says you have $1, you have $100, now you have $99. Or you could just not keep track of balances at all, and you just keep track of deposits and withdrawals, and the balance is entirely calculated. And the question is just what the initial state is.
And you can keep going back and forth between that. And so the cool thing is that going back to the whole integrating with legacy databases and stuff. So if folks who are looking to make Kafka sort of the central component of their architecture, and maybe for microservices or whatnot, but when you do that, you need all of your data to be in Kafka, right? To leverage that information to the fullest and make it more efficient for like joining and actually doing computations on the fly. And so what that means is that if you have legacy databases, you'll want that information translated into events so that you can join it onto your event streams later. And so then the problem becomes, okay, how do we translate our database changes to events? And how do you do that? Well, you use the underlying commit log of the database. And you just capture those changes and put it into Kafka for you to use. So we have that going on. Or you can just sort of monitor like individual IDs on the database table and bring those in anytime there is a change. So there's different ways to do that, but it is just making that change. And once it's in Kafka, then you can do it again. You can translate it back from those events to a table if you wanted and get the same thing. So it is really cool how you can just keep going back and forth and get the same information, those same facts.
Okay, so then if I understand I'm starting to get my head around this now, it's connectors that makes that possible. So you might have a data lake, like a blob storage in a cloud somewhere. You might have a warehouse, which is a big pile of data. You could have an actual database, whether it be SQL or MySQL or whatever, or data could be even an application, like GitHub could be some data, like, all of your commits or something in Datadog or something in Salesforce. You get connectors from Confluent or from anyone, these kind of managed connectors. And then that's the thing, that's the adapter that lets you bring stuff into Kafka and then party.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Then you party. Absolutely.
And then you party.
Then you can finally do
step
things.
4,
it's
profit.
Great. Yeah. We should add that to the website. Yeah, absolutely. Use Kafka, then profit. But yeah, and that's kind of the biggest hurdle, I think, for a lot of people is understanding that you really just got to throw it all into Kafka. That's your best bet. Just do it. And that actually gets you closer, going back to the sort of the data meshy thing, right? Is that if you have all of your data products available in Kafka, then you can just profit from there, right? Because then you're basically at a full data mesh at that point, I feel, right?
So these pipeline tools and the tools that one builds once something is getting into Kafka, and then you build, traditional like data pipelines, I used to think about them running on a schedule. We'd have like the 2 a.m. pipeline is running now for bill payment or whatever. But pipelines now, they kind of are always running. They're not on a schedule anymore. It's kind of like this infinite stream.
What's so interesting to me is that as the person who is building those things and setting up those triggers for those reports to run at 3 a.m, I never once thought of that as a pipeline because and when I started working on Kafka, then it made sense. Like this is a pipeline, right? Because it's a stream, right? Liquid, water, pipeline. Kind of makes sense. It kind of adds up, right? So yeah, it is never ending, right? And so now we're moving towards these actual pipelines where anytime an event is generated, right? Going back to that order system, anytime a new event comes in, a new order comes in, we have different pipelines that sort of branch off of that incoming order and extract the relevant information for any of those downstream, more polished products that we might want to offer to other systems, right? Other people, other teams in the organization.
Very
and it's going to
cool.
keep doing that, right? Anytime a new order comes in, we're going to keep doing it.
Uh-huh. And this works for anybody. Like I'm a .NET developer. I can go and learn about Kafka for .NET if I'm a Python person or Go or whatever.
Yeah,
there's something for everyone.
Cool thing. Yeah, we have a lot more, actually, a lot of cool .NET resources recently. coming out to make that more accessible to folks using it. I like to say Kafka is available in all of your favorite languages and some of your least favorite ones. You have a lot of flexibility to use it wherever you're comfortable with. And there's also like a REST API too, if you just want to interact with your cluster that way. So yeah, we really wanted to make it as easy as possible for folks to get started with Kafka and integrate with their systems.
I actually saw the Apache Kafka for .NET Developers course at developer.confluent.io, where you can go to learn about all this kind of stuff. What does Kafka do? But also take actual courses online and learn this stuff, which is super awesome.
Yeah, no, we've got a lot of great things on there. Really cool stuff like the .NET course, like a data mesh demo, right? If you're still struggling with whether or not it is a buzzword or if it's actually a real thing, we do have an actual data mesh that we've built using Kafka, and you can sort of spin it up. You can see an actual data catalog and interact with it, which is pretty cool. So it's a really good starting point if you don't believe me. So
very cool. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so great to be here. Thank you.
I've been chatting with Danica Fine. She's a senior developer advocate at Confluent, and you can learn all about their stuff and take some of the courses like I did at developer.confluent.io. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.